Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we're venturing deep into the forgotten woods, down flooded roads, into crawl spaces, abandoned schools, and places where the air feels too still to be safe. These are 10 chilling wilderness horror stories, each one darker than the last, featuring faceless watchers, blood-stained backpacks, haunted gymnasiums, and creatures that never blink. If you've ever felt something watching you in the dark, this is for you. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Man with the Jug Never Blinked. There was something deeply wrong about the way he stood there in the snow. Not just the silence, or the freezing wind, or the fact that we were in the middle of nowhere. It was the way he held that plastic jug above his head, like it meant something. And through all the screaming and the swirling snow, he never blinked, not once. I had just moved to northern Minnesota that December after dropping out of college. I needed time away from everything, so when a friend of my uncle offered me a cheap place to rent near Lake Vermilion, I took it. It wasn't much. Just an old ranger's cabin that hadn't been used in years. No internet, no neighbors. Just trees, snow, and the occasional deer that wandered by. The nearest town was 20 miles south, and the only way in or out was a single road that cut through the woods and curved along the edge of the frozen lake. I worked part-time at a bait shop near the highway and walked to the main road every morning to catch a ride with a guy named Rick who ran the shop. The walk from the cabin to the road wasn't far, but in winter it felt endless. Dense pine trees on both sides, snow up to my knees, and silence so thick I could hear the ice shifting under the lake. I was used to quiet, but not that kind of quiet. It was the kind that pressed in on you, the kind that made you feel watched, even when you were completely alone. At least, that's what I used to think. Until the day I saw him. It started one morning just after New Year's. The sun was barely up, and the sky was a dull gray blanket as I trudged through the snow toward the main road. I remember hearing a faint crunching sound somewhere behind me, like another set of footsteps echoing mine. I stopped and looked back, but saw nothing. Just the trail I had made through the snow and the trees swaying gently in the wind. I shook it off and kept walking, thinking maybe it was just snow falling from a branch. But as I got closer to the road, I saw someone standing across the highway just beyond the tree line. He was tall, wearing a heavy coat with the hood pulled up, and in his right hand, he held a large plastic jug. It looked like one of those cheap gallon water jugs, except the liquid inside wasn't clear. It was dark, almost like iced tea or oil. He was yelling, but I couldn't make out the words. His voice didn't carry right in the cold. I slowed down, confused, not sure if he needed help or was just another local drunk. But even from a distance, one thing stood out. He never blinked. His eyes stayed wide-locked in my direction. I tried to ignore him and kept walking toward the road where Rick usually picked me up, but something about that man gnawed at me. His shouting didn't stop, and though I still couldn't understand the words, the sound got sharper, like he was angry or warning me. I glanced over again and realized he had moved. Not fast, just a step or two closer to the edge of the trees, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten. There were no houses nearby, no cars parked along the road, no reason for anyone to be standing out there in the cold, yelling at strangers at 7 in the morning. Rick's truck was late that day, which only made things worse. I stood there in the snow, shivering, pretending to look at my phone while keeping the man in my peripheral vision. He didn't move again, but he didn't look away either. Just stared right through me, holding that jug like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. The longer I waited, the more aware I became of how alone I really was. There was no one else for miles, no cell service. And if Rick didn't show up soon, I'd be stuck out here with him. And something told me he was waiting for that. Rick's truck finally appeared just as the man stepped out of the tree line. I didn't notice it at first. I was too busy pretending not to panic as I watched him walk in slow, deliberate strides across the snow-covered ditch that separated the woods from the road. He wasn't rushing. That was the part that scared me most. He moved like he had all the time in the world. The jug in his hand swung slightly with each step, and his eyes were still fixed on me, wide, unblinking, like he didn't even notice the cold biting into his face. Rick honked as he pulled up, but I barely heard it. I scrambled into the passenger seat and slammed the door shut. "You okay?" Rick asked, but before I could answer, I looked back through the window. The man was standing just a few feet off the road now, close enough for me to see that the jug was half full with something thick and reddish. His mouth was still moving, but I still couldn't hear him. The windows were fogged from my breath. I wiped the glass. Rick looked over his shoulder and said, "Is that guy talking to us?" I said nothing. I was too focused on his mouth. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was mouthing something slow and steady. And that's when I realized what it was. He was repeating my name over and over again. I told Rick to drive. Now. He gave me a weird look, but didn't argue. As the truck pulled away, I kept my eyes locked on the rearview mirror. The man didn't follow. He just stood there in the snow, watching us go, mouthing my name like a chant. Rick asked again if I was okay, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, like something had frozen inside me. We drove in silence for a while until the cabin was far behind us, and even then, I couldn't shake the image of that jug swinging by his side, or the way he never blinked. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how he knew my name. I hadn't told anyone I was staying in that cabin except Rick and my uncle. The next morning, I asked Rick to pick me up a little earlier. Didn't want to be alone on that road again. But when I got outside, something made my blood run cold. In front of the cabin in the fresh snow, there were footprints. Just one set. They led straight to my window and then away again, disappearing into the woods. And sitting on the porch rail was the jug. Empty. I didn't touch it. I just stared. And I swear to God, the air still smelled faintly of my name. I told myself I imagined it. That maybe the jug was just something someone left behind. Maybe the footprints were mine from the day before. But none of that explained how he knew my name, or why I started hearing it in the wind every night after that. Just a whisper, faint, carried through the trees. Even after I moved out 2 weeks later, the feeling followed me. In mirrors, in quiet places, in dreams where snow never stops falling, and he stands at the edge of the woods, jug in hand, eyes wide, and staring straight through me. I've lived in 3 different states since then. But some nights when the air gets cold enough, I swear I smell that sharp, metallic sweetness and hear my name again. And I remember, he never blinked, not once. Story 2, the cabin pizza order. I used to think delivering pizzas was the safest kind of job for someone who liked quiet nights and empty roads. But that belief ended the night I took an order out to a cabin deep in the Oregon forest. The place wasn't even on GPS. And by the time I realized something was wrong, the snow had already trapped me. And they were already waiting. It was mid-December, and I had been working at a small pizza shop in southern Oregon for a few months. Most nights were slow, especially during storms when nobody wanted to drive or leave their cabins. The town was small, surrounded by thick pine forests. and old hunting trails that turned to ice during the winter. I was one of only 2 drivers willing to go out in bad weather, so I usually got the remote orders. That night, a call came in right before closing. A single large pizza and a cinnamon roll pizza for dessert. The address wasn't in our system, and the customer gave strange directions over the phone. Take County Road 12 until the 3rd mile marker, then follow the dirt path until you see a green reflector nailed to a tree. I should have passed it to the other guy, but he had already clocked out. The manager looked at me and shrugged. It's your run if you want it. The snow was falling, but not too heavy, and I figured it'd be a quick tip. I had no idea what kind of cabin it was or who lived out there. But I followed the directions anyway. I remember thinking it was weird how calm the voice on the phone had sounded. Almost too calm. The dirt path was narrower than I expected and completely covered in fresh snow. My headlights barely cut through the trees, and the deeper I drove, the more uneasy I felt. After about 10 minutes of crawling through the woods, I finally saw it. A small cabin tucked between 2 sloped hills, one dim porch light flickering above the door like it hadn't been changed in years. No other lights, no tire tracks, no sign of movement. I parked and grabbed the pizzas, the boxes already cooling in the night air. As I stepped onto the porch, the front door creaked open before I even knocked. A woman stood there, maybe in her 50s, thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She looked surprised, no terrified to see me. "Get inside," she whispered harshly, eyes darting behind me. "You shouldn't be out there." I froze, caught off guard. "I'm just delivering your pizza," I said, holding up the boxes. Her face twisted. "I didn't order anything," she snapped, voice trembling. "But they did. And they want you here." My stomach dropped. I glanced back toward my car, but all I saw were my own tracks, and beyond them, fresh ones. Approaching. She yanked me inside and slammed the door before I could speak again. The lock clicked behind me, and she pulled the curtains shut in a single motion. The cabin was dimly lit by a few old lanterns, and the heat inside was barely enough to keep the frost from creeping along the windows. "You need to stay quiet," she whispered. "They've been circling the house for hours, watching, waiting." I didn't know what to say. I stood there with 2 pizzas in my arms, trying to make sense of the moment. "Who?" I finally asked. Her hands were shaking as she pointed to the woods outside. "They ordered that food to get someone to the door." I wasn't going to answer, but you walked right into it. I placed the boxes on the table and looked toward the front window. Just shadows and snow, no movement. But the silence was wrong. Not peaceful, just heavy. The kind that pressed against your skin like pressure underwater. I took a breath and reached for my phone, but she slapped it out of my hand. "No signal out here. And if they hear it ring?" Her voice trailed off as we both turned toward the window. A shape had moved, just barely. But enough. Something was out there. And it knew I was now inside. The tapping started just after midnight. At first, it was faint, like a branch brushing the siding. But then it grew sharper, more deliberate, like fingers drumming on glass. I edged closer to the front window, trying to see through the frosted pane. That was when the porch light flickered on again by itself, and a figure stepped into view. A man, or at least someone shaped like one. His head was tilted unnaturally to the side, and in his hand, he held a rusted axe. His clothes were soaked, his face shadowed, but I could see his breath in the cold air, puffing steadily like he wasn't in any kind of hurry. I stepped back instinctively, and the woman grabbed my arm. "That's one of them," she hissed. "There's always 2. I looked at her, but before I could ask what she meant, we heard movement from the back of the cabin. Something heavy brushing against the outer wall. Then footsteps, slow, crunching through snow, coming around the other side. My pulse thundered. We were surrounded. "We have to get to the cellar," she whispered, pulling open a hatch door in the floor beneath a threadbare rug. I hesitated but followed her down into the narrow space beneath the cabin. Dirt floor, wood beams, no light. She sealed the hatch above us, and everything went black. And then we heard the front door creaking open. Not forced, just opened, as if someone had the key, or had never left at all. We crouched in the darkness, barely breathing, as footsteps moved through the cabin above us. Slow, unhurried. Whoever it was knew the space intimately. Boards creaked in familiar rhythm. The woman beside me clutched my wrist with a force that bordered on pain. Then a second set of footsteps joined the first. Lighter, faster. A quiet laugh echoed through the floorboards. They were speaking in low voices too soft to make out, but one word reached us at driver. My chest tightened. They weren't just looking for anyone. They were looking for me. A sudden crash upstairs sent dust raining down. A table overturned. A door slammed. I couldn't take it anymore. I whispered to the woman, "Do you have another way out?" She nodded and pointed toward a narrow tunnel at the far end of the cellar. "Old coal chute. Leads behind the shed." I didn't hesitate. I crawled through, first the cold earth scraping my arms as I pushed forward. Behind me, I heard the hatch creak. Light spilled into the crawl space. A shadow moved inside. They had found the rug. I reached the end of the chute and kicked out the rotted wood panel. Snow poured in, and I pulled myself into the night air. But I was not alone. I scrambled through the snow, slipping behind the shed, just as a figure stepped out from the trees to my left. But it wasn't the man with the axe. It was the woman. The same one who had pulled me inside. Only now her face was different, calm, almost pleased. She raised a hand and whispered, "You made it further than the others." My blood ran cold. Before I could speak, another voice called from inside the cabin, laughing. I turned and ran until the trees swallowed the sound. I never went back. The cabin was gone by morning. No tracks, no shed, no cellar. But sometimes when I deliver to the edge of the forest, I hear tapping on the window. Slow, rhythmic, like they're waiting for me to come home. Story 3. The Tire Iron in the Blizzard. I used to believe most people who stopped to help you on the side of the road were just being kind. That changed one night in the middle of a snowstorm when my truck slid off a mountain pass. The man who pulled over didn't ask if I was okay. He only asked if I had $50. And then he reached for something in his truck bed. It happened last winter when I was driving through northern Utah on my way back from a weekend hiking trip. I had taken the scenic route through the mountains, thinking I could beat the storm that had been moving in all day. I was driving an old Isuzu pickup my dad had given me after I got my license, and while it ran fine on dry roads, it handled like garbage on ice. Around 7 that evening, the snow really started to fall, and visibility dropped fast. I passed a few signs warning of dangerous conditions ahead, but I figured I could push through and make it to the next town. I didn't see another car for miles, just thick pines buried in white and road lines disappearing beneath swirling snow. I slowed down around a bend, and that's when I lost control. The truck slid sideways and skidded into a shallow ditch landing with a hard thud that rattled my teeth. The engine was still running, but my tires spun uselessly against the slope. I was stuck, I sat there for a few minutes, gripping the wheel, trying not to panic. No cell signal, no light except the faint glow from my headlights. Just trees, wind, and the snow falling harder by the second. About 15 minutes passed before I saw headlights in the distance. A large truck slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder across from where I was stuck. The driver waited a moment, then climbed out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an old army-style coat and a knit cap pulled low over his face. I couldn't see his eyes, but something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, put me on edge. He crossed the road without waving or calling out and stopped a few feet from my window. I rolled it down halfway, the freezing wind biting at my skin. "Need a pull?" he asked. His voice was flat, no friendliness in it. I nodded quickly, relieved. "Yeah, I can pay you when we get back into town." He stared at me for a second too long, then said, "$50? Cash." I hesitated. I didn't have that kind of money on me. I can Venmo or PayPal or whatever," I offered, trying to sound calm. His face didn't change. "Cash," he repeated. Then he turned and walked back to his truck without another word. That's when I saw him reach into the bed and pull out a tire iron. Not a tow chain, not a rope. Just that long, rusted bar of metal. At first, I tried to convince myself he was just grabbing it in case I needed help clearing snow around the tires. But the way he held it didn't feel helpful. He wasn't holding it by the end, like a tool. He was gripping it in the middle like a weapon. He started walking back toward my truck, and I felt my pulse spike. The wind howled through the trees, and the snow was coming down so hard now I could barely see past my windshield. I considered getting out and trying to talk him down, but something in my gut screamed not to move. So I stayed where I was, engine still running, heater blowing weak warmth across the windshield. He reached my window again and tapped the tire iron gently on the glass. Not hard, not enough to break it, just enough to make it clear who was in control. "You got something else to trade?" he asked quietly. His eyes were visible now, shadowed but alert. I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. He smiled just a little. "Then maybe you better come with me. It'll be a long night out here." He tapped the glass again, harder this time. And I realized then that this wasn't about money. It was about me. I didn't answer him. My body was frozen, not from the cold, just pure fear. He tapped the tire iron again this time, dragging it down the length of the window with a high screeching sound that made my skin crawl. I reached slowly for the gear shift, praying my truck still had enough traction to move. My hand was slick with sweat, even though the cab was freezing. He leaned closer and peered into the window eyes, flicking around the inside like he was taking inventory. Then he smiled wider. "Looks like you don't got much," he muttered. "But I'm not picky." I slammed the truck into reverse and hit the gas. The tires spun for a second, then finally caught. The truck jolted back and I nearly lost control again, but I kept my foot on the pedal. He jumped back just in time, slipping slightly on the ice as I tore backward onto the road. I threw it into drive and floored it, the back fishtailing wildly. In the rearview mirror, I saw him sprint toward me, raising the tire iron high. A loud clang rang out as he struck the tailgate. The sound echoed like gunfire in the trees. I didn't stop, didn't even look again. My hands were trembling on the wheel, breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The snow blurred everything ahead, but I didn't care. I just needed distance, needed miles. Because whatever that man wanted that night, it had nothing to do with $50. I drove like something was chasing me, because in my mind, he still was. The road twisted through the forest, like a snake covered in snow and ice, and I could barely keep the truck steady. My wipers were useless now, just smearing slush across the windshield. And every time I blinked, I saw his face in the rearview mirror, even though I knew he wasn't there. I didn't slow down. Not for the curves, not for the patches of black ice, nothing. My only goal was to get to the ranger station about 6 miles up the road. I remembered passing it earlier that day. Just an old wooden outpost with a radio tower beside it. As I hit the straightaway, the truck jerked from the ruts in the snow, and I nearly lost control again. The back end swung wide, and for a second, I saw nothing but trees. But I corrected in time and pushed forward. When I finally saw the outline of the station through the haze of falling snow, I nearly cried. I skidded into the lot sideways, parked crooked, and jumped out, leaving the engine running. I ran to the door and pounded until a light came on. Someone opened it just enough to see my face and let me in. I was safe. For now. The ranger let me sleep in the back room that night, and though I was safe, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing the sound of the tire iron scraping my window, the way his breath fogged the glass slow and steady like he had done it before. The next morning, I walked out to my truck and froze. There pressed into the fresh snow by the rear bumper were footprints, his boots. Not from last night. These were new. The snow had fallen for hours after I arrived. He had come back. He had followed me here. I never told the ranger. I just drove home and never returned to that road again. But sometimes when snow starts to fall heavy, I hear that sound again. The metal. The tapping. As if he's still waiting for me to stop. Just once. Story 4. Under the bed again. When I was a kid, I used to check under the bed every night before falling asleep just to be sure. I grew out of it like most people do. But last winter, when I stayed alone at my family's old mountain cabin, something changed. I saw something move under the bed. And this time, I wasn't 8 years old. I was 23. The cabin had been in my family for decades, tucked away in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. My parents used to bring us there every winter when we were kids back when things still felt simple. After my dad passed, we stopped going. The place sat untouched for years, buried in snow and silence. Last December, I decided to spend a week up there alone, needing a break from the noise of the city. My older brother Mark was supposed to join me, but a last-minute work issue kept him away. I wasn't nervous. I knew the place. The creaky floors, the wood stove that never worked right, the bedroom with the sagging mattress, and the faded quilt Mom made. It was all familiar. Comforting, even. The first few nights were peaceful. I made tea, read old books, watched the snow pile up outside. There was no Wi-Fi, barely any cell signal, and only one working lamp in the bedroom. It didn't bother me. I felt safe up there. Tucked into the woods. Alone, but not lonely. At least not until the third night when I came back from the bathroom and saw something low and dark slipping under the bed. And I knew I hadn't imagined it. I froze in the doorway, heart thudding in my chest. The bedroom was dimly lit by the old lamp on the nightstand, casting long shadows across the floor. I stared at the bed, trying to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a trick of the light, or the way my eyes adjusted from the hallway. But I knew what I saw. Something had moved. Something had slid under the bed smooth and fast, like it knew how to hide. I crept forward slowly, each step making the floorboards groan beneath my feet. I crouched beside the bed and hesitated, then lifted the edge of the quilt and peeked underneath. Nothing. Just dustwood slats and a pair of my boots. I exhaled, forcing a laugh to shake off the fear. Get it together. I whispered to myself. I stood up and glanced at the window. Snow was falling harder now, thick flakes piling against the glass. I turned off the light and climbed into bed, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. But as I lay there in the dark covers pulled tight, I swore I heard a soft scrape against the floor beneath me, like something shifting slowly, just waiting. I lay completely still, eyes wide open in the dark, listening. The wind outside howled against the cabin walls, and the rafters groaned with each gust. But beneath all that was something closer, quieter. A faint breathing, shallow and uneven. It wasn't mine. I held my breath, straining to hear. It was definitely coming from beneath the bed. My mind raced. There was no one else here. I had locked the door, checked every window. The cabin was sealed tight, and yet something was down there. I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand, but the moment my hand brushed it, the breathing stopped. Silence fell so thick, I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I waited motionless, staring up at the ceiling, like if I didn't move, whatever was under me would forget I was there. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Then came the whisper. Not loud, not clear. Just a single word I couldn't quite catch, whispered from below in a dry, brittle voice. I bolted upright and flicked on the lamp. Light flooded the room, and I immediately dropped to the floor, yanking up the quilt. Again, nothing. Just empty space. But that didn't make me feel better, because now the closet door across the room was open, and I was sure it had been shut. I stared at the closet, the door now slightly ajar, a sliver of blackness peeking out between the frame and the warped wood. I hadn't opened it, I was sure of that. I hadn't even touched it since arriving. My suitcase was still zipped shut, my clothes still folded inside. There was no reason for the closet to be open, but it was. Slowly, silently, like someone or something had slid out of it when the light was off. My hands were shaking as I stood. The floor creaked with every step as I crossed the room, heart pounding harder with each inch. I pressed one hand against the door and nudged it open. It swung wide with a soft groan. Nothing inside. No coats, no shelves, no hidden doors. Just an old wooden floor and dust. And footprints, not mine. Barefoot prints leading out from the back wall, pressed into the dust like they had been made minutes ago. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. That was when the scratching started. Not from the closet, from under the bed. Long, deliberate scratches like nails dragging across old wood. I backed against the wall as the sound grew louder, faster. Then a voice, a low rasp like sandpaper and breath. You stopped checking? I ran. Out the bedroom, down the hallway, out into the snow, barefoot and panicked. I didn't stop until I reached the woodshed behind the cabin, locked myself inside, heart pounding, breath fogging the air. I waited there until morning light crept through the cracks. But even then, I didn't go back inside. Not alone. Not ever again. When the sun finally came up, I stepped out of the woodshed, legs stiff from the cold, every part of me still wired with fear. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving everything blanketed in white quiet and still. I could see the cabin from where I stood, dark and lifeless, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. I didn't want to go back inside, not even to grab my things, but my phone was still charging next to the bed, and I needed to call someone, anyone. I crept back up the steps, each one groaning beneath my weight. The door creaked open. Inside, everything looked the same. The lamp still glowed softly, my suitcase untouched, the bed undisturbed. I held my breath and stepped into the bedroom, eyes scanning every corner. I grabbed my phone and turned to leave. Then I stopped. The closet door was open again, this time all the way. I froze, backing toward the hallway, phone clutched in my hand. Just as I crossed the threshold, a loud thump came from under the bed, followed by something sliding fast across the floor toward me. I didn't look. I ran, out the cabin, into the snow. And I didn't stop until I reached the road. I never went back to that cabin. My brother returned a week later to check on the place and found my suitcase still zipped on the bed, said the phone charger still plugged in, and long drag marks on the wooden floor leading from the bed to the hallway. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to convince him we should sell the place. But even now, in my apartment, miles from those woods, I still wake up some nights convinced something is beneath me. I sleep on a mattress on the floor now. No frame, no space to hide. But sometimes late at night I still hear it. That slow, rasping whisper. You stop checking. Story 5. The Mustang in the snow. It was the third night of the storm when I saw the Mustang parked at the edge of our property. Old, blue, covered in snow. At first I thought it was my brother's. Same model, same year. But something felt off. The way it was facing the house. The way the headlights blinked once, like it knew I was watching. My brother Danny and I had grown up in that house tucked near the base of a pine-covered ridge in northern Idaho. After our parents passed, I stayed behind, while Danny drifted between cities, jobs, and people. He wasn't the type to settle, but every winter he came home for a few days around the holidays, like clockwork. This year was no different, at least at first. He'd called me 2 nights earlier, said he was driving through Montana and expected to arrive by Friday. But the snowstorm hit early. Roads closed, power flickered on and off. By Saturday night, the house felt swallowed by white silence. I kept checking my phone, but his messages stopped coming. I told myself he was fine, probably waiting it out in a motel somewhere. But when I saw the Mustang parked across the road that night, buried half in snow, my stomach turned. It looked just like his. Same dent on the left fender, same cracked mirror. But there were no tracks in or out. No lights on inside. Just the car, sitting there, engine off, headlights dim, and pointed directly at my bedroom window like it had been waiting. Like he never left the driver's seat. I stood by the window for nearly 10 minutes, watching the Mustang through the falling snow, waiting for movement. A door opening, a light flicking on, anything. But the car remained still, engine dead, half buried in the drift. I finally grabbed my coat and boots and stepped outside, the cold slamming into me like a wall. Each step toward the road crunched deep through the untouched snow. No other footprints, no tire tracks behind the car, like it had just appeared there. I circled to the driver's side and peered in through the frost-covered glass. The seat was empty, no keys in the ignition, but there was something on the passenger seat, Danny's old army duffel, the one he never traveled without. My breath caught. I knocked on the window anyway, heart racing. Nothing. The snow swirled around me, and the silence of the woods pressed in. I pulled out my phone to call him again, but there was no service. Just as I turned to head back to the house, I noticed something strange. The passenger door was unlocked. When I opened it, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the ground. Written in my brother's handwriting were 5 words. Don't let them inside. Ever. I picked up the note with numb fingers, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The message was unmistakably Danny's handwriting, with the jagged slant of his capital letters burned into my memory. But why would he leave it here without a word, without calling? I looked around, expecting, hoping to see him coming up the road or stepping out from behind the trees. Nothing. just snow and stillness, and that car sitting like a forgotten ghost. I backed away slowly and returned to the house, locking the door behind me, something I rarely did out here. I turned off all the lights and sat by the window watching. Hours passed. The snow kept falling. The Mustang never moved. Around 2 in the morning, I saw something or someone step out from the woods on the far side of the property. A tall figure, thin, wearing no coat. It walked straight toward the car, paused at the driver's side, then turned to face the house. I blinked. The figure was gone. I leaned closer to the glass, heart thudding again. That's when I saw it. A second set of footprints now surrounded the Mustang, but none led away. They just circled and circled, as if whatever had made them was still out there, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure again, standing by the Mustang, faceless in the dark. By dawn, the snow had slowed, casting everything in that eerie bluish glow that only comes after a storm. I got dressed and stepped outside again, this time with a flashlight and a heavy wrench I kept in the tool shed. The air was painfully still. No wind, no birds, just silence. The Mustang was still there, half frozen, the duffel bag now missing from the passenger seat. My stomach sank. I walked around the car, slowly checking the windows, trying to make sense of it all. That's when I saw it. On the rear windshield, drawn into the frost with a fingertip, were the words, "You opened the door." I backed away, dread sinking into my bones. Suddenly, from the trees behind me, I heard branches snapping. Not random, steady. Footsteps. I spun around, flashlight beams shaking, catching glimpses of movement between the pines. A figure stepped into view, my brother. Or at least, it looked like him. Same coat, same walk, but his face was blank, eyes wide, unfocused. He stopped 10 feet away and whispered, "It's not me." I froze. He repeated it more urgently this time. "It's not me. Don't let it in." And then he bolted into the woods. That's when I heard the knock at the front door behind me. 3 slow taps, like it had been waiting for me to leave the house. I turned and ran toward the house, slipping in the snow, heart hammering in my chest. Whoever or whatever was at the door knocked again. 3 deliberate taps, spaced too evenly to be human. I made it to the porch just as the knocking stopped. I froze, breath, steaming hand hovering over the knob. I didn't open it. I went around back through the kitchen entrance, locking it behind me. The house was quiet, the air heavy. I crept through each room, checking the windows, making sure they were all latched. When I reached the front hallway, I stopped cold. The door was still shut, but there were wet footprints on the floor, bare feet, leading from the door toward the stairs. I didn't hear it come in. I didn't see it move, but it was here. I grabbed the keys off the hook and sprinted back outside, not even bothering with shoes. I jumped into my truck, turned the ignition, and floored it down the drive. I didn't look back, not until I reached the main road. That's when I checked the rearview mirror and saw the Mustang still parked in the same spot. Engine running, headlights on, but no one behind the wheel. Just that same note resting against the glass. Never saw Danny again. The police found the Mustang still idling the next day, engine warm despite the snow piled on top. There were no footprints around it anymore, just mine. The note was gone. So was the duffel bag. They searched the woods for days, but turned up nothing. I sold the house that spring and never went back. But sometimes on quiet nights, I still wake up to the sound of slow knocking. Not loud, just 3 steady taps. Always 3. And once, just once, I looked outside and saw a blue Mustang parked across the street. Engine running, headlights dim, and someone in the driver's seat who looked exactly like me. Story 6. The power went out. The night the power went out, I was alone in a ranger station halfway up a mountain in northern Montana. The wind had been howling for hours, and the snow was piling fast against the windows. At first, I thought it was just another storm. But then the lights cut out, and I heard footsteps upstairs. The thing is, this station has no second floor. The station was built in the 1960s, a squat wooden building nestled between pine ridges, with only one road in and out and no nearby structures for miles. It used to be a fire lookout post, but now it served mostly as a winter trailhead checkpoint and weather relay. I was assigned a week-long solo rotation, something most rangers hated, but I welcomed. I liked the quiet, the isolation, the rhythm of snow and silence. My days were simple log weather reports, check the radio tower, monitor wildlife activity, and keep the generator running. Nights were even quieter. I'd listen to the storm outside, and sometimes stare into the trees with a flashlight, just to remind myself the world was still there. By the third night, a heavy snowstorm rolled in, cutting off all cell signal and burying the station under a thick white blanket. The wind made the place creak and groan, but I was used to it. I locked the front and back doors, double-checked the windows, and settled in with a mug of instant coffee. Around midnight, the power blinked once, then died. The heater cut off. The silence deepened. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, measured, moving directly above me. I sat frozen on the hot coffee cooling in my hand, staring at the ceiling where the sound had come from. Heavy footsteps, one after another, as if someone were pacing directly above me. But there was no second floor. Just the sloped tin roof, maybe an attic crawl space no one used, but certainly not enough room to walk. I set the mug down and grabbed my flashlight. My breath came in slow clouds, the air inside growing colder by the second now that the heat was gone. I stepped into the hallway, listening. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I waited. Nothing. I aimed the flashlight toward the ceiling hatch near the back of the station. It hadn't been touched since I arrived. I would have noticed. I would have heard. I took a deep breath and walked toward it, as each board creaking under my boots. I reached up and tugged the chain. The hatch dropped open with a soft wooden groan. I aimed the flashlight inside. Dust, cobwebs, a narrow beam across old insulation and wood slats. No movement. No sign anyone had ever been up there. Then something shifted behind me. A soft exhale. I spun around with the light. But the hallway was empty. I stood there in the dark hallway, the attic hatch still hanging open above me, flashlight beam trembling slightly in my hand. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind playing tricks on my ears, maybe a raccoon on the roof, maybe my own nerves getting the better of me. But the exhale I'd heard wasn't the wind. It had been too close, too human. I backed into the main room, locking the door behind me, even though I knew it wouldn't matter if something was already inside. I tried the radio dead. No static, no click, nothing. The generator outside had stopped completely, and I wasn't going out there in the storm to restart it. I grabbed my backup lantern and lit it, its soft glow throwing long shadows against the walls. That was when I noticed something strange. The mudroom door, the one I always kept bolted, was slightly ajar. Just a few inches, enough to see the snow drifting in. My heart dropped. I hadn't opened it. I would have felt the draft. I walked toward it slowly, every nerve in my body screaming. I reached out and nudged the door shut. It clicked softly. And just before I turned away, I saw it. A single wet footprint on the floor. Barefoot. pointing into the room. I stared at the footprint, the shape of it sharp against the wooden floor, still glistening from melted snow. It was unmistakably human, the toes curled slightly as if whoever left it had paused mid-step. But it was the size that struck me. It was small, maybe half the length of my boot, like a child's. My stomach twisted. I scanned the room with the flashlight, heart hammering every shadow, now a threat. I followed the wet trail, each print leading farther into the station, disappearing into the hallway near the storage room. That door was shut. I reached for the knob, hand trembling, and paused to listen. Nothing. No breathing. No movement. Just silence. I opened it slowly. The room was empty except for stacked gear and a few tools along the wall. But something caught my eye, a damp handprint smeared across the window pane from the inside. I stepped back. My breath quickened. Then from the attic hatch, still hanging open above the hall, I heard a soft whisper. Just one word. Cold. I backed away, eyes locked on the ceiling. Then the footsteps began again, faster this time, moving across the roof above me, circling. Something dropped with a loud thud outside. I spun toward the window and saw it. A face. Pale, hollow eyes, watching me through the glass. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just stared. And then the lantern flickered and went out. The darkness swallowed the room so completely that for a moment I couldn't tell if my eyes were open. I reached for the matches on the shelf beside me, fumbling blindly until my fingers found the box. One strike, two. The third caught. The tiny flame hissed to life, barely illuminating the space around me. I grabbed the emergency flare from the cabinet and cracked it open. Red light burst into the room, washing everything in an eerie glow. The face in the window was gone. I didn't wait. I threw on my coat, grabbed my pack, and bolted for the back door. I burst into the snow, the cold slicing into my skin like blades. Behind me, I heard something heavy thud against the cabin door. Then another. I didn't turn around. I sprinted through knee-high snow, following the barely visible path toward the ranger's shelter a quarter-mile down. Branches snapped behind me. The wind howled louder, or maybe something else was howling. My legs burned. My breath came ragged. The snow seemed to pull at me like hands. But I kept running, flare clutched in one hand, until I saw the outline of the emergency shed. I didn't stop to unlock it. I slammed into the doors and forced it open, diving inside and bolting it behind me. And then I waited. I stayed in that shed until daylight. No sleep. Just silence and the occasional crunch of snow outside that made my heart stop. When I finally worked up the courage to return to the station, I found the front door wide open. No footprints. No damage. Everything inside looked exactly as I'd left it, except for the attic hatch. It was closed, latched from the inside. I never reported it. I transferred to a different district a month later. But I still hear things in the wind sometimes. Whispers, light footsteps on the roof at night. And once, just once, I found a small, barefoot print in the snow outside my apartment door. Perfect, clean, pointing in. Story 7. The Bloody Backpack. I was hiking a remote trail through the Bitterroot Mountains when I found the backpack. It was just sitting there in the middle of the path, like someone had set it down and vanished. At first, I thought it was abandoned gear. But then I saw the dark stains on the straps. Fresh, wet, and whatever was inside was still moving. It was early October, and I had taken a week off to solo hiking a lesser-known loop through the Bitterroot Range. The air was crisp, the leaves just starting to turn, and I had barely seen another person in days. I loved that kind of isolation. No signal, no noise, Just me, the trees, and the crunch of boots on dirt. I was about 4 miles from my next campsite when I spotted the backpack. It sat right in the middle of the narrow trail, upright, as if someone had carefully placed it there. No torn straps, no sign of a struggle, just wrong. I hesitated before approaching, something in my gut telling me to leave it alone, but curiosity won. I crouched down and noticed the blood on the straps, not dried, still damp. And the pack itself twitched, not violently, just enough to make me stagger back. I waited, heart-racing eyes scanning the woods. No animals, no sounds. I grabbed a stick and nudged the zipper open. Inside were clothes, a shattered phone, and what looked like clumps of fur. But under that was something wrapped in flannel, something breathing. That was when I heard branches snapping behind me. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. I spun around, the stick still in my hand, eyes scanning the dense trees that bordered the trail. The sound had stopped. No wind, no birds, just silence. I looked back at the backpack, heart pounding. Whatever was wrapped in that flannel had gone still. I leaned closer, one trembling hand, reaching toward it, unsure if I should unwrap it or just walk away. Then I saw it. A small hand. Human. Pale. Sticking out from the edge of the fabric. It twitched once, then curled into a fist. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. It wasn't just something wrapped in cloth. It was someone. A child. I turned, ready to call for help, but there was no signal. No one. I looked up the trail. Still empty. I shouted anyway. "Hello, is anyone out here?" Nothing. Then I heard it again, branches snapping, this time to my right. Closer. I turned and saw movement between the trees. Tall, thin, too fast to track, but unmistakably upright. It moved like a person, but wrong. I grabbed the backpack and slung it over my shoulder, the weight surprisingly light. Then I ran. I didn't know who I was helping or what I was running from, only that something wanted that backpack back. The trail narrowed as I ran, branches clawing at my arms, and faced the weight of the backpack, shifting with each step. I didn't dare stop. Whatever was in those woods wasn't following on the trail. It was moving through the trees, matching my pace, just out of sight. I could hear it. The crack of twigs, the rustle of pine needles. Sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a person step out. But nothing ever did. The backpack shifted again. I could feel movement inside. Subtle, like breathing. I nearly dropped it, but something told me not to. Instead, I veered off the main trail and headed toward a ranger post, marked on my map, one I remembered being about a mile off route. Less than halfway there, I reached a clearing and stopped to catch my breath. That's when I noticed it. The forest had gone completely still. No wind, no sound, not even my own footsteps echoing back. I turned slowly in a circle. On the far edge of the clearing stood a figure. Tall, motionless, skin gray and stretched head tilted as if curious. It didn't speak. It didn't move. But the backpack pressed harder into my back, almost as if trying to pull away. That was when I realized whatever I was carrying wasn't just trying to be found. It was trying to escape. I stood frozen, locked in a silent stare with the figure across the clearing. Its eyes, or what looked like eyes, were just dark indentations, too deep and hollow to reflect any light. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The thing didn't blink, didn't flinch. It just stood there, head cocked like a predator, calculating the space between us. And then, without warning, it took a step forward. One long, gliding step. I turned and ran, the backpack thumping against me as I plunged back into the trees. I didn't follow a path anymore. I barreled through the brush, tripping over roots, ducking under limbs, the cold mountain air slicing my lungs. Behind me, I could hear it. Not running, just moving. Smooth and fast, it didn't need to step like the woods bent for it. The child in the backpack stirred again, a soft gasp pressing against my spine. I didn't stop, not until I reached the old ranger outpost, half-collapsed, moss-covered windows shattered. I dove inside, barricading the door with a broken bench. The moment I did, the child in the backpack began to scream. High, inhuman, a sound that didn't belong in anything alive. I dropped the pack. It writhed on the floor seam, stretching. Then came the pounding on every wall of the cabin at once. The windows shook. The ceiling groaned. I covered my ears as the thing outside circled faster and faster, and the voice from the pack wailed again, this time in words. Let me go, or he will. I backed away from the writhing backpack, heart slamming against my ribs, the words echoing in my head like a warning. Let me go, or he will. The walls groaned under the weight of something massive moving outside, circling, tapping, scraping. I grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit by the door, loaded a round with trembling hands, and aimed it at the backpack. What are you? I whispered. The pack stilled for a second. Then the voice, now softer, desperate, whimpered, Please. I fired. The flare hit the floor beside the pack and exploded in a burst of red light and smoke. The cabin lit up like a furnace. The pounding stopped. Silence swallowed the clearing. I didn't wait. I kicked the back door open and sprinted into the trees. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing near a frozen creek. When I looked back, the woods behind me were calm. No sound, no figure, no sign of the backpack, just trees swaying in the cold wind. I stumbled to the nearest ranger station by dusk, frostbitten and shaking. They asked what happened. I said I got lost. I never told them about the backpack, about what I might have freed, or what might still be looking for it. Weeks later, back home, I started finding leaves in places they didn't belong. Pine needles on my kitchen floor, muddy footprints outside my apartment door, barefoot small, just like before. I haven't gone hiking since. I changed my number. I moved across the state. But sometimes when I lie awake at night, I hear something dragging outside my window. A zipper, breathing. And once, just once, I woke up to find a small flannel bundle on my porch. I didn't open it. I threw it into the river. But deep down, I know it doesn't matter. Some things once carried never really leave you. Story 8, The Crawl Space. I never believed my grandfather's stories about the thing living beneath his house. He used to warn us kids never to crawl under there, not even for lost toys. Said it was hungry. Said it remembered faces. I thought it was just old man talk until last summer, when I went under to fix a busted pipe and found someone had beaten me to it. After Grandpa passed, the family gathered at his old cabin deep in the woods near Marietta to clean out decades of clutter. The place had been built by hand in the 40s, perched above a sloping hill with no cell service and only one working radio. I volunteered to stay behind a few days to handle basic repairs. Mostly out of guilt, I had barely visited him these last few years. On the second morning, I noticed the kitchen sink barely drained, and when I checked beneath the house, I saw the crawl space door ajar. That was strange. Grandpa always kept it locked with a rusted chain. I assumed the winter storms had loosened it, so I grabbed a flashlight and slid under. The space was low and cold, the earth damp and uneven. Cobwebs brushed my face. Pipes snaked along the floor above me. I shuffled forward, trying not to breathe the moldy air, aiming the beam toward the main valve. But halfway there, I saw something that made me stop. Deep grooves clawed into the support beams. Long, jagged, not from tools. Something had been dragging itself around under here. And next to the valve sat a pile of small bones, stacked neatly like someone wanted them found. I stared at the bones, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They looked like animal bones at first, small, brittle maybe from a raccoon or fox. But the longer I looked, the more I saw that they had been arranged deliberately. A circle. At the center, a tooth. Human. My stomach turned. I aimed the flashlight deeper into the crawl space, the beam catching on something just past the valve, a blanket, old and rotted, half buried in dirt. I shuffled closer, pushing through the tight space, trying to stay calm. As I reached out to move the blanket, something shifted underneath it. I froze. Not a rat. Too big. Too slow. The shape was long, humanoid. I whispered out loud without thinking. Hello? The shape jerked. The blanket slid off a pale shoulder. My breath caught. Whoever or whatever was under there wasn't dead. It moved slightly, almost like it was stretching. That's when I heard it. A low, wet sound from the far corner of the crawl space. Breathing, heavy, labored, not coming from the thing in front of me. Something else was in there with us. Something bigger. I dropped the flashlight. The beam spun wildly, and then I saw the eyes. Watching me. Not blinking. Not human. I scrambled backward, knees scraping against the dirt, heart slamming so hard I could barely breathe. The flashlight had landed on its side, casting wild shadows across the beams and earth, but I could still see the eyes wide, reflective, deep set, and far too large for any person. The breathing grew louder. Wet, almost rattling. I turned and crawled faster now, ignoring the burning in my legs, ignoring the low whispering that seemed to start from all directions. It wasn't in any language I knew. Just sounds hissing, chattering, almost like laughter choked off halfway. I glanced back once and saw a movement, something long and pale pulling itself toward me from the darkness. I reached the opening and tried to push myself out, but the wooden frame caught my shoulders. I kicked hard, twisting, finally breaking free into the daylight. I turned and slammed the crawl space door shut, heart still in my throat. For a long time, I just sat there in the dirt staring at the door. I knew I should lock it, find something to block it, but I didn't move. Because even from the outside, I could still hear the breathing. Still hear something sliding around under the house. And worst of all, I realized the thing I'd seen under the blanket never moved again. Whatever had watched me, it wasn't alone. I finally forced myself to move, heart pounding, and shoved an old shovel through the crawl space handles, jamming it shut. Then I stumbled back into the house, locked every door and window, and sat by the fireplace trying to calm down. But I couldn't shake what I saw. The eyes, the bones, the thing under the blanket. I told myself I imagined it, that it was some animal, that the cold and fear had warped my mind. But later that night, while I was upstairs packing to leave early, I heard something. The sound of wood creaking from below. Slow measured like footsteps. I grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs. The crawl space door was still closed, still jammed, but the floorboards above it were vibrating slightly, like something was pressing against them from underneath. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft, raspy, coming from the heating vent near the living room floor. I remember you. I froze. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was amused, like it had waited a long time. I backed away, but the vent rattled again. Another whisper followed. Grandpa said you'd come back. I dropped the flashlight. When it landed, the beam shone across the floor, and there, just beside the vent, was a muddy handprint. Small, human, but missing a thumb. The same hand I'd seen under the blanket. That thing hadn't moved earlier because it was never the one watching me. It was bait. I didn't think. I grabbed my bag keys and sprinted out the front door into the freezing night. Gravel crunched beneath my boots as I ran to the truck, breath fogging the air hands, shaking so badly I fumbled the keys. Behind me, I heard it again in movement inside the walls, sliding, pressing against the boards. I finally got the door open and threw myself inside, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered once, then again. The third time, it roared to life, headlights flaring onto the trees ahead. That was when I saw it. Just for a moment. A figure crouched beneath the cabin, pale face peeking from the crawl space, hatch mouth stretched too wide, smiling like it had won something. I floored the gas and tore down the dirt road, not daring to look back. I drove until I hit the main highway, heart still racing, hands clenched around the wheel. When I finally stopped at a gas station an hour later, I checked the truck bed. Nothing. But inside the glove box, tucked neatly beside the registration papers, was a tooth. Old, yellowed, human. And scrawled beside it in faded pencil were 3 words: "It remembers you." I sold the cabin a month later, told the agent it needed work but never mentioned the crawl space. I haven't been back since, but sometimes late at night, I hear scratching beneath the floorboards of my apartment. Once I found dirt in my bathtub. Another time, a tiny handprint on the inside of my closet door. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, stress, grief. But last week I woke to the smell of damp earth and something breathing next to my bed. When I turned on the light, nothing was there except a familiar blanket folded neatly on the floor and a small space beneath my bed, just wide enough to crawl into. Story 9, The Shadow Across the Lake. The first time I saw the shadow, I thought it was a tree swaying on the far side of Mirror Lake. But trees don't move like that. They don't glide across still water without sound. I kept watching frozen on the dock as the shape drifted closer, not rowing, not walking, just moving. And then it stopped and turned to face me. I had rented a cabin by Mirror Lake to escape the noise of the city after a brutal year of late nights and burnout. The place was small, rustic, tucked deep in a pine valley with no neighbors for miles. The lake itself was perfectly still, like glass, untouched and quiet. Locals said it was spring-fed and bottomless in parts, but I didn't care. I just needed peace. I spent the first 2 days reading on the dock, fishing, letting my mind slow down. At night, the frogs sang, and the stars came out in full view, something I hadn't seen clearly in years. But on the third night, just after sundown, I saw something strange. A ripple moved across the lake from the far bank, too large for a fish, too steady for the breeze. Then came the shape, tall, dark, like a figure wrapped in shadow gliding slowly over the water's surface. I stood up, heart ticking faster, and watched it stop halfway across. It didn't wave, didn't speak. It just turned as if it could see me. Then the frogs stopped, all of them. The silence dropped like a curtain, and I knew somehow that whatever it was, it had seen me too. I stood there on the dock, barely breathing, staring at the figure on the water. The lake was motionless again, like the ripple had never happened. The shadow remained in place directly across from me, not moving, not swaying. I blinked and looked away for half a second, and it was gone. Not a splash, not a sound, just vanished. I backed away from the edge, heart pounding in my ears. That night I locked every door and window, telling myself it was a trick of the light, a reflection. a hallucination from too much solitude. But just past midnight, I woke up to a wet sound outside, like something dragging across the dock. I crept to the window and pulled the curtain. The dock was empty, but near the end of it, there was a trail slick and dark, like something had crawled out of the water and slithered across the wood. I stared for a long time, waiting for movement. Nothing came. When I stepped outside the next morning, the trail was gone. The dock was dry. But sitting right where I had stood the night before was a single object. My book. Waterlogged, pages torn. I had left it inside on the table. I picked up the soaked book with trembling hands, flipping through the shredded pages. My name had been scribbled in the margins over and over in ink I didn't own. I looked toward the lake. The surface was smooth again, calm as if it had never been disturbed. I told myself I'd imagined it all, that I'd dropped the book without noticing. But deep down, I knew better. Something had been here. Something had come for me. I tried calling the rental office, but the landline was dead. No bars on my cell. I considered driving back to town, but the single dirt road leading out was flooded from the storm the night before. So I stayed. I didn't leave the cabin for the rest of the day. Just sat near the fire, every creak in the floorboards making my chest tighten. That night, just after 2 a.m., I heard it again. The dragging. Slower this time, closer. I tiptoed to the window, and this time I saw it. A shape standing at the water's edge, tall, thin, arms too long, head tilted toward the cabin, watching, no face, just darkness. And then it stepped onto the dock. The wood didn't creak, the water didn't ripple. It was coming, quietly, patiently. And it never took its eyes off me. I staggered back from the window, nearly tripping over the rug, heart hammering in my chest like a warning drum. I didn't want to believe what I saw. I didn't want to believe that thing was real. But I heard the footsteps now, soft thuds on the dock, impossibly slow, deliberate. I grabbed the fireplace poker and turned off every light, crouching near the kitchen, where I had a clear view of the front door. Minutes passed. Nothing. Then the doorknob twitched. Just once. A single metallic click that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I gripped the poker tighter, held my breath. Another click, then silence. I started counting seconds to calm myself when I heard the creak of the back porch boards. It had circled the cabin. I bolted to the bedroom, locked the door, shoved the dresser in front of it, and backed into the corner. That's when I noticed the wet footprints. They started beneath the window and led across the room. I hadn't heard glass break, hadn't heard anything. But something had already been inside. I looked behind me. Nothing. I turned back toward the door. A shadow moved across the floor. Long, stretching toward me. A low voice whispered from behind the dresser, clear and close like breath on my neck. You saw me. Now I stay. And then the lights exploded. Every bulb in the house burst at once. I didn't wait. In the dark, with glass crunching underfoot, I grabbed my bag and crashed through the bedroom window, slicing my arm on the frame as I fell into the cold dirt outside. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, but the lake remained still, unnaturally still. I didn't dare look back. I sprinted toward the truck, fumbling with the keys, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The moment I got the door open, I slammed it shut and locked every door, hands shaking uncontrollably. The headlights flicked on. For a split second, I saw it standing at the tree line just beyond the reach of light. Its head tilted, arms limp at its sides, face still unreadable, still blank. The engine roared as I peeled out of the drive wheels, spitting mud, tearing down the flooded road. I didn't stop for an hour, not until I reached a gas station miles away. When I finally looked at myself in the mirror, I expected dirt and blood. What I didn't expect was the dark handprint across my back, perfectly formed, as if someone had rested their palm there and pressed gently. It hadn't just seen me. It had touched me. It's been 3 months since I left Mirror Lake, but I still wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I hear footsteps sloshing through water outside my window. My lights flicker for no reason. My reflection sometimes lags a second behind. And every night at exactly 2:13 a.m., the same wet handprint appears on my bedroom mirror no matter how many times I clean it. I move to a city. I stay away from water. But last week I got a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of me standing on the dock at Mirror Lake. Only I never took that photo. I was alone. Or at least I thought I was. Story 10. The school gym that didn't lock. The gym at my old middle school was the one place everyone avoided after dark. It wasn't just the creaking bleachers or the lights that flickered for no reason. It was the door, the one on the far wall that never locked. Janitors swore they'd secure it every night, and yet every morning it stood wide open. Back when I was in 8th grade, I had to stay late one Friday to help set up for a weekend science fair. Most of the school had emptied out by 5, and by 6 it was just me and Mr. Carlisle, the janitor, working in silence. I remember asking him once why he always skipped that far door when locking up. He just shook his head and said, "Some doors don't want to stay closed." I laughed, thinking it was just one of those creepy adult things to spook kids. But around 7:30, I realized I'd forgotten my jacket in the gym and went back alone to grab it. The hallway was silent, of the kind of quiet that buzzes in your ears. I stepped into the gym lights, already dimmed, and walked across the polished floor toward the bleachers. That's when I saw it. The far door, the one no one used, was cracked open. Not wide, just a sliver. Enough to see that the space behind it wasn't lit. Just pitch black. I stood there, jacket in hand, feeling like something on the other side was watching me. Not waiting, just expecting. Like it had always known I'd come. I should have left right then, but something held me in place. Curiosity, maybe. Or that strange pressure you feel when silence gets too thick. I stepped closer to the door, trying to convince myself it was just stuck from old hinges, or maybe the janitor forgot again. As I reached for the handle, a chill spread across the gym, like the air had dropped 10 degrees in seconds. I paused, listening. There was a sound, faint, almost like breathing. Not labored, not human. Just steady, soft exhalations coming from the crack in the door. I whispered hello and instantly hated myself for it. The breathing stopped. The silence felt heavier now, like the air itself was listening. I backed up a step, heart pounding. The door creaked open another inch slowly, like something on the other side wanted me to see it, but not all at once. I caught a glimpse, just a flash of pale-skinned fingers dragging across the floor. Then it pulled back into the dark. I turned and ran, footsteps echoing too loud, but the gym felt endless, like the exit kept shifting farther away. And as I reached the door, I heard it whisper from behind me. Just one word. My name. I didn't tell anyone what I saw that night. Who would believe me? A shadow behind a door, a whisper of my name in a gym everyone thought was just old and creaky. But after that, things started changing. I'd hear my name called faintly in empty hallways. Lights would flicker when I walked past certain classrooms. Once I found my locker wide open with all my books rearranged, every page dog-eared to the same number, 13. Still, I kept quiet, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. The worst part came a week later during gym class. We were doing laps, and I lagged behind, tying my shoe near the far end of the bleachers. That's when I noticed the door again. It was shut, but this time, something had been scratched into the wood. 4 letters. My name. Not carved deep, but fresh, splintered at the edges. I stared at it too long because when I finally looked away, the gym was empty, silent. Everyone was gone. Not a whistle, not footsteps. I ran to the locker room, but the lights flickered and went out the second I entered. Then I heard it again. That breathing. Closer now, just beyond the row of lockers. And this time, it wasn't waiting. It was moving. Toward me. I froze behind the lockers, barely breathing, listening to the slow scrape of something dragging along the tiled floor. Not footsteps, something softer like cloth or skin being pulled across concrete. The air was thick, heavy, and carried a sour, earthy scent, like wet wood and old dust. I crouched low, trying to stay out of sight, but I could hear it now, low, guttural muttering in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded like someone talking backwards, slow and deliberate. I reached for the end of the row, planning to bolt, but the moment I shifted, everything went silent. Then a hand slammed down on the metal locker right beside me. I screamed and sprinted toward the exit, dodging around corners, slipping on the floor. The locker room door was wide open, but just before I reached it, I felt something graze my back. Cold. Damp. It didn't grab me, it just brushed past like it wanted me to know it could have. I made it into the hallway, heart racing, and turned to look back. Nothing followed. But there on the wall, in smeared wet streaks, was my name again, written backward this time, just like the voice. I ran out of the building without telling anyone, convinced that if I spoke of it, I'd bring whatever that thing was fully into my world. That night, I dreamed of the door. And in the dream, it opened all the way. I begged my parents to transfer schools, and after enough sleepless nights and sudden nosebleeds, they agreed. I never returned to that gym. But leaving didn't help. In the new school, I still saw flashes of movement in the corners of classrooms. At night, I'd hear soft tapping from inside my closet, even when it was nailed shut. Then one afternoon, I got called into the office for a delivery. No one knew who sent it. Just a small brown envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo, grainy, black and white. It showed the gym door from my old school wide open, and standing in the doorway was a pale figure with long arms and no face. Just below the photo was my name, scrawled in the same backwards handwriting I'd seen on the wall. I dropped the photo, heart pounding. That night, I tried to burn it in the sink, but the flames wouldn't catch. Instead, the lights in the house flickered and went out completely. When they returned a second later, the photo was gone, but the sink was full of muddy footprints, leading out across the tile toward my bedroom. And the door to my closet had creaked open, just a little. I moved again. Different state, new name, no forwarding address. But it didn't matter. I still wake up some nights to the sound of gym bleachers creaking, even though I now live in a high-rise. Mirrors in my apartment fog on their own, and sometimes my name appears in reverse on the glass. Last week, I got another envelope, no return address, no stamp. Inside was a photo of my new bedroom, taken from the foot of the bed while I was sleeping. I checked the door. It was still locked. The only thing out of place was the faint smell of old varnish, like a gym floor. And on my closet door, freshly scratched into the wood, were 4 backward letters, my name. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, So be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.